Hello, everyone. This is the supplementary lecture for the Candlemas homily that came out actually on Candlemas on the 2nd of February this year. This is a little behind the normal, but did allow for any questions that were asked or anything like that. And so that's kind of what I want, right? I want to be able to record these, finalize this presentation after the reading is out. So if anyone has any questions, they can go ahead and ask those, and I can incorporate them into this video. So now I say Candlemas, right? Actually, if you notice, if you listen to that homily, if you watch that homily, it's not actually called Candlemas at all in that homily. It's called the Purification of Mary. Sometimes this day is also called the Presentation of Jesus. They're all correct, right? Pretty much. In Latin, you get the Presentation of Jesus and the Purification of Mary. Candlemas is the traditional English name that covers this day. So let's get right into it, though. But I would say that, so I'm going to supplement this one largely with a look at the text, which I mentioned last time. So we're going to actually go into a manuscript a little bit into this lecture before we start getting into like the vocabulary or whatever. And we'll look actually at a manuscript. So I'll have to stop sharing this presentation here and switch over to a different screen to look at. But still, so this is a first series homily. I'm not sure actually when I was looking at when I looked at the second series, for example, I didn't see another one on Candlemas. Maybe he had one in not one of those big collections, right? The first series, second series, or those third series on Saints' Lives. But this is the one from first series. So Candlemas itself is a traditional English name for the Presentation of Jesus and the Purification of Mary on February 2nd, which is 40 days after Christmas, right? It's actually the end of the Christmas season, pretty much. The name does not actually appear in Ælfric's homilies, which I mentioned. And then Candlemas is attested late in Old English, mentioned in the laws of King Ethelred, and then it is also mentioned in the chronicle about Swain Forkbeard, which is here. In 1014, Swain ended his days at Candlemas, which I believe we would say he actually probably passed away somewhere on the February 3rd, is what I believe modern historians would say. So this actually the celebrations began in the 8th century in England. This actually was only a celebration starting in the 7th century in the Western Church. I believe it was 4th century in the Eastern Church. So it had been around for a few centuries, made its way over to England in the 8th century. So the name, again, we're going to start at the end here. This is actually the very end of the homily, because while he doesn't call it Candlemas, he makes allusions to why it is called Candlemas, right? So here's Old English. I'm not going to read that for you. You can go listen to the reading if you want. But here's the translation. It says, "Be it known also to everyone that it is in churchly customs that we must on this day bear our lights to church and let them there be blessed, and we should go after with the light among God's houses and sing the hymn that is set. Though some people cannot sing," it says sign there, my mistake, "they can nevertheless bear the light or that light in their hands, for on this day was that true light, Christ born to the temple, who released us from darkness and brings us to eternal light, who lives and reigns without end. Amen." So this is that illusion, right? This is candles, this procession of candles that is where we get the name for the holiday. And this is actually different from the other attestation of this procession by Ælfric himself. In fact, so Luza actually mentions it in his notes at the end of the book. If you have his first series homily book, you can go and look at the note. It's his 16th note for this homily. And he points out that there are differences between this description and that given in the letter of the monks of Eynsham and in Regulus Concordia 54. This letter is by Ælfric himself. And in these works, Ælfric suggests only monks are involved in the procession, not lay people, which are clearly included in the description shared above. And then we have actually a blessing for the candles from the benedictional of St. Ethelwold. This is in Latin, of course, and I didn't take the time to translate it here, but we do have Deschman when he was talking about this benedictional. He says, "This prayer stands out as the only one in the entire manuscript that is not the Episcopal Mass benediction." So it's obviously very important, right? It has some spiritual and cultural significance that it is the only one of this sort in that benedictional. And this is from the Regulus regularis concordia, actually. So on the purification of St. Mary, candles shall be set out ready in the church, to which the brethren are to go to get their lights. On the way thither they shall walk in silence, occupied with the psalms, and all shall be vested in albs, if this is possible, and if the weather permits. On entering the church, having prayed a while, they shall say the antiphon and collect in honor the saint to whom the same church is dedicated. Then the abbot, vested in stole and cope, shall bless the candles, sprinkling them with holy water and censing them. When the abbot has received his candle from the doorkeeper, the chanting shall begin, and the brethren shall receive the light and light their candles. During the return procession, they shall sing the appointed antiphons until they reach the church doors. Then, having sung the antiphon, responsum excipit Simeon, would they collect erudi quasamus domine, they shall enter the church singing, and they respond cum inducurunt puerum. Next, they shall say the Lord's Prayer, and tears shall follow. After which, if the brethren were not vested for the procession, they shall vest for the mass, during which they shall hold their lighted candles in their hands until after the offertory, when they shall offer them to the priest. So this is again the one that it's like this procession is restricted to the monks themselves, the not lay people, pretty much, right? But it is another attestation from this time period of what this celebration for this holy day would be like. So this is actually, like I kind of mentioned earlier, it is the last day of Christmas, but we're also going to look at this quote. This actually, both of these are quotes from Eleanor Parker in her book Winters in the World, which I mentioned in the last lecture. So during the Middle Ages, the Christmas season lasted 40 days until Candlemas on the 2nd of February, and January was supposed to be a month of feasting, not fasting, the exact opposite of the modern dry January. Candlemas is a festival which has at its heart a meeting between childhood and old age, birth and death, and winter and spring. On the 2nd of February, coincided with a significant point in the solar year, midway between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. It's a time when the days are getting longer, daylight is growing stronger, and in Northern Europe, the earliest spring flowers are starting to appear. It was a natural time for a festival of light, and that was what Candlemas became. Again, I'd recommend that book. I'll probably quote from Parker several times as she is kind of goes through the Anglo-Saxon year like I'm kind of doing. So the one thing I will note, this is mostly for any Americans, anyone's familiar with this tradition. The Groundhog Day is actually on February 2nd as well. And that actually comes from Candlemas tradition. So this tradition we get actually from the Pennsylvania Dutch. Dutch is itself is an old word. Dutch just means people, right? And so nowadays we use it to denote people from the Netherlands, and Deutsch, right, from Germany. But in reality, Dutch, if you go back a few hundred years, actually meant Germans. So the Pennsylvania Dutch, not to be confusing, therefore, are actually descendants of Germans, and they still speak German, at least a dialect of German. And they get this Groundhog Day celebration from German traditions for weather prediction that take place on Candlemas. I'm not going to go into all the details of it because it's not really that important, but if you want to look into it. In England, this bit of weather lore is actually associated with St. Vincent's Day, which is the 22nd of January. And it is, it does not account for any gophers or groundhogs. If the sun shines, though, good weather follows for the year. That it's pretty straightforward, and it's pretty close in time, right? That's only that's not very many. It's like less than 2 weeks apart. So, and then we have a picture of this girl holding a pet groundhog, of all things. Okay, so now we're going to actually look at the text. So I'm going to stop sharing here for a second, and we are going to open this back up onto a different page here. Here it is. Okay, so what do we got here is, well, this is from the Bodleian Library, actually, here. So this tells us the manuscript. Bodleian Library, manuscript Bodleian 343. If you go here to folio 72R, which I will link this below in the description if you want to look at this, we have a copy of this homily. Now, this is not the autograph, right? So if you study manuscripts, or if you codicology, whatever, an autograph is the original, right? It's the one written by the author, right? And then you have the stuff that comes later, and this is something that came later. And so there's lots of homilies in here. Actually, this is called the Bodily Homilies. This is a title for the book. And you actually are going to have a lot of this information over here. Like, you can click on contents and see, and you can get a bunch of different stuff, right, that's mentioned here. So we got some first series homilies in here. We got some second series homilies. We got even some of the Saint Lives, I believe, in here. We also have works in here that are not by Ælfric. And that's going to be mentioned in here too. So you can look at that. You can also look at some notes here, and you're going to look at some decorations, right? Initials are mainly red. You can see that here, which is a G. It's capital G. Green or black. This one's red, of course. And then you can also see into the material. It's on parchment, of course. And you're going to look at other things like collation, which is, I guess that'd be if you're particular into binding. And then the layout, same thing, pretty much. I guess if you wanted to recreate it. The hand itself is the one that is most interesting for our purposes, I feel like. And then we have provenance and origin. So what we do know is that this is a 12th century manuscript, late 12th century. It is actually written probably in one hand, potentially West Midlands provenance here, and that it is actually written in the Insular script and Caroline scripts at the same time, kind of. It has a lot of Caroline stuff in it. We're going to kind of look at that, actually. So, like the S, for example, the S's we're going to look at is a Caroline S. Looks like what would later be the long S, right? But you also have both the G's, actually. So you're going to have the Insular G, and you're going to have the Caroline G. I will point this out to you, but there are some things we're not going to look at, right? Like, we're not going to look at this superscript for Sanctus, right? Or quad or drichten, or quath right there. So quath, there's a CW with a superscript bar above it, denotes that this is quath. So we are going to look at some things that are pretty much abbreviated. But we're going to start, actually, the first thing I want to do is actually read this first little clause here. And it says, God, bad, unthara alda lau. So this is the Insular G here, you'll note. And so God commanded in the old law, right? That's pretty straightforward. This is how the homily starts, right? But is it really? No, it's not actually quite. This, if you read the text, if you look at if you looked at the presentation, if you have Thorpe's, if you have Luoza, it's actually the text itself actually says, the original would actually say God bebad unthara aldan I, right? So this is not quite the same, actually. So God bebad, we don't have the prefix be here, and unthara is pretty much one word here in the text. You'll get it's normally separated, and then it says alda rather than aldan. So we have a more Middle English, and the late 12th century would be Middle English here. We're going to see some other things that really denote this as a Middle English text, even though it is a copying of an Old English text. Note, this is an early Middle English text, though, and Ælfric is late Old English. So it really reads almost exactly the same. And then besides that, so you have Aldan instead of Alda. The biggest one here, though, is, and apparently there's been studies on it, actually. Believe there's notes mention it. Yeah, right here. So we have on linguistic features of the two main English hands. See a recent discussion in Dance Richard. Alda I, nuai, or nuai, laia. So two words for law. So we have God bad untare alda lau, lacha. And so this is actually law, right? The old law, old I. So the Old English I means law, and that is the Old English word for law, right? You have in late Old English, you can get laha or lahu, and that itself actually comes from Norse. And we'll talk about this a little bit in a second, but when we stop looking at the manuscript, but just note that, see, this is not completely the same, right? And that the biggest one here is this is so recognizable, right? Like Alda instead of Aldan, you know what I mean? Right? Bebad, not here anymore, but just bad. So But law over I, right? Not quite the same. I doesn't actually survive into modern English at all. We don't have any modern equivalent of it. We just have law now. So, but I want to go to the end, just like we actually were previously looking at. We go to the end of this. We're going to go right here to this last, well, it's separated as a paragraph in most of these things. And we're going to read it. We're just going to read it. So, and we'll take it in chunks, actually. If this was an actual class, I would have the students read these little sections here. So we have witte ak ehwa, that iset is own churchlicham. Right. So the things different from our Thorpe and Liuza, the original text, right? The Old English, as opposed to this version of it. So witte ak ehwa. So, and actually in the original, it's these two words are switched around. It's ak and yewa here, but it's yewa, yehwa, ak in the Old English. So wita, yehwa, ak. If you look at my translation as well. So that's one thing you'll notice right away. Another thing is this. It doesn't look like a W. So if you go to like really old like Epinal and Effort glossaries, really old English stuff, or even if you look at a lot of Old Saxon, when they have a W, it'll actually just be two U's, right? Literally a double U, right? And for like, it makes something confusing. Like wolf will be U-U-U-L-F. That's wolf, right? So what you actually have almost exclusively then in Anglo-Saxon text is you're going to have this win. So it's a rune. It looks a lot like a P. And now, I don't know if you've noticed, but Old English doesn't have a lot of P's actually, and that's because Proto-Indo-European didn't have a lot of B's, and so they had win, and it was fine. Win as in like it means joy actually, and it's where Eowyn is like horse joy, right? Whatever the name. So we have Witte ak Yehwa, and then we have another thing here actually. So this is a scribal abbreviation for that. It's just a thorn with a line through it. It's really common. It's just a cross thorn. And then we have Iset. Again, this is the S. It looks more like the long S. We'll be more familiar with. That's a Caroline character that is not insular. And then, but do note, this is the insular G, Yehua. So Iset, the one thing you also know is it's Yeset, Yeset in the Old English. Now, if you read Middle English stuff, you're going to notice a lot of those verbs that have an I or a Y right before them, right? And it's the same thing as this GE in Old English. We don't have them in modern English. They're all gone, right? Pretty much. Unless like you have like some weird archaic word that's sticking around, but you never actually hear people see, but maybe you read every once in a while, like a klept or something like that. So iset rather than yeset. And then is on churchlicham. And one thing you'll notice here too with churchlicham is you don't actually have the im. This superscript over this u is denoting there's an im here. We don't have the im actually right now. Sometimes they denote there's an n, but in this case it's an im. Right? And it actually does the same thing with this one, thahum. So thahum, thews in modern English. So customs are churchly customs, right? So be it known also to everyone that it is in churchly customs. That is what this says. Be it known that it is set in churchly customs. Okay. Thahum, getting that win. And then the next thing we have is another thought. So it's that again, that scribal abbreviation of that crossed thorn. Then we have a wave. So again, the win. Wave sheolun on this a die. So this is another difference actually. So the original text is going to say that wave sheolun on thisum die. This is this. Then we have beran ule leocht. That looks pretty much the same. We're going to go down the line to Chirchan. And this is one thing we actually talked about in the last lecture. So this is the Tyrian note. The only Tyrian notation really that's used in Old English. So call it Tyrian. I think over here they call it a Tyrian nota. sometimes, but it's an et, right? This is the et, it's and. So und or and, what we really put it for Ælfric in his case. And then we have laton, geom, thar, blestichan. See. So Heom is a Middle English thing, just like a set right here. We have Heom, as opposed to what we had originally was he. He was there, right? So that we must on this day bear our lights to church. So, and let them there be blessed. So them, let them there be blessed, right? As opposed to where, let me look at the text here. And on latan he thar bletzian. So also bletzian is spelled different here. So it's bletzian as opposed to bletzian. But that's not that important. And then we have another Tyrian et and we sheolon sithan gan. So this is one thing I think you should notice in. Look at the G here. This is a Caroline G. You can see this G up here for dia. Yeah, well, it's the spirit, so we're going to have a insular G. In this case, the scribe's helping us out. It's not a spirit, it's a stop, and so we're going to have the Caroline G. It's gone, right? Gone mirtha, well, tham, really, in the original. Leuchte, betwixt, just betwixt in the original. Godes husa. In the original, it is Godes husum. On singan, thona. So this is again, there's an E here in the original. Lof sang the therto iset is, which in the original is the tharto is yeset is. So again, we had instead of 9, we have a GE, and then we don't have an E here, and the original we have an ash. Besides that, it's actually really similar. So you could go on to more. There are more changes. Again, if you want to explore this, this will be in the description if you want to look at it more. And then we have the explicit for another one, and then we have incipit and explicit for the end of the homily, the Candlemas homily we're looking at. So that is the actual text. And do with that as you will. I think it's fun. It's a little hard to get used to the writing of it, the paleography, but it does feel a bit rewarding. I think I feel for me as a learner, in some ways you kind of want to go from the original the text and translation with the modern translation to the original text, looking at it yourself, right, like with these homilies, to potentially just straight up the actual manuscript when you can find it. So again, that's not the autograph. Again, this is late 12th century as opposed to very late 10th century or very early 11th century. But we're gonna stop sharing this, and we're gonna go back to what we were looking at before. Share screen. Hey, so we already looked at the text. So now we're going to look at some things we kind of already went over as they were actually in the text itself. Now we looked at. So we have law, I. The modern law words are actually exclusively from French, with the exception of law, the word law, which is from Old Norse loch, which is actually has the same root as lay. So these are the things that are laying down, pretty much, is what the law is. It's not to be confused with ach or I. This should have a line over it if you were going to read it in like a modern scholarly text. It's going to help you out. Except it's not as I, right? So but sometimes is spelled the exact same I, but it means river or running water. And over here, actually, we have the Parker Chronicle, which is a 9th century text. It's the oldest extant copy of Inez Law, who's a king of Wessex. And this is the manuscript if you want to look at it. So we have the word temple as well. So this comes from Latin templum, which I think is unsurprising. Some sources I looked at said it comes from Old English, that it is borrowed into Old English from Latin. Some said that it comes into Old English from Proto-Germanic, which is where it came in from Latin. Regardless, it's from Latin, and it wouldn't really have changed much at all if it was from Proto-Germanic, whether it came in at Old English. The native word for temple, though, is all, which actually is called the cognate Gothic als, but this is not as common. It's not a very common word at all, actually, in Old English. We also are going to look at some things that this kind of came up near the beginning and near the end. So, but it made sense to talk about it here. So we have weef in Old English, which means woman or wife, kind of like the French femme, but it is the origin of the word wife, right? This is where modern English wife comes from. We also have weefman, which is a woman person. This is literally what it means. And where woman comes from is the word woman. It comes from weefman. We lose the F over time, and it's weeman or woman, right? So we have where, which doesn't really survive in modern English at all, but it is mean the common word for man, and it can mean husband in Old English. You're going to translate it that sometimes. And then it also is the first part of the word werewolf, which is why we have the picture of werewolf over here. So it does survive in modern English, but just not really. It is related to the Latin vir, vir, if you know your Latin. So this is actually compared, though. We have weef and weefman, we have where and what. So we actually have wapman. There should be no vowel here. I guess sometimes you'll see an E here, but that's just an insertion. But so this is a word for where, right? It means the same thing as where, pretty much, but it literally means a weapon or penis person, which is silly, right? I mean, like, this one didn't stick, right? In modern English, it'd probably be, I mean, I'd say probably wapman, maybe wepman, but it didn't stick, right? And then we have the accreditation. That's actually from Weird Tales magazine, which this is not related to the stuff I do, but I do kind of study pulp fiction as well. So why nod to that stuff. We also have some stuff that comes up early on in the homily, Hisa and Madden. So we have Hisa, which means a warrior, a boy, or just a young man. And here specifically we have Hisa child. So it's a Hisa child, which is a boy child. I think most people translate it as a male child. I think that's a little unnecessary. And then we have Madden, which is maiden. It's where the word maiden comes from. It means maid or girls. Maiden is a diminutive. Actually, we'll mention that in a second. I think girls pairs well with boy child, but maiden fits well too, right? So if you say boy child and girl child, maiden child also does. But we're going to look at kind of maiden doesn't necessarily have this girl sense to it, which is a little interesting. We do have the Virgin Mary, though. She is called Madden Maria. And again, you have this example of Mary not even being capitalized. And then we can also, but maiden can also just denote a virgin and virginity, right? Maidenhood or myhood, had, is just virginity, right? So John the Baptist is actually described this way, right? In mychada, unida Johannes sepulchera, in virginity, John the Baptist remained, right? So he remained in maidenhood. That is literally what that means, right? So this is actually Ælfric describing Mary as a maiden earlier in the sentence, and then compares her with John the Baptist. So this is Maith, which is like actually the Old Saxon Machath, if you know the Old Saxon, which means girl or virgin. The E in ending is a suffix for the diminutive. It's kind of unnecessary, right? You could mean like Maith is girl and Maiden is little girl or something. And it is actually just an I-N in Proto-Germanic. So Machathin, then, yeah, Machathin, I should say. In Proto-Germanic is what this word would be, maiden. And it's actually related to Mahu, which means boy. This is Old English word for boy, and it is related, would go back to this similar Proto-Germanic root. All right, but speaking of John the Baptist, we're going to talk on John the Fuluchtera, which is interesting word, right? Like we definitely have this Mediterranean vocabulary when we speak of most gospel things these days. So Fuluchtera means Baptist or baptizer, which you could guess, right, with the name, with this title attached to John. So he's also in one place called the Ful Wicht Vader, and this Wicht is actually kind of giving you bit more of the word, right? So it's a little bit obscured here. This is late attestation. Wicht is showing you a little bit of what this actually is. It's a compound. It's fool and wicht. And then Vater is right here. So he's the Baptist father, or really is what that means. So we have Fulwicht or Fulucht in this case. It is actually the abstract noun of the verb fulwian or fulichan, which is full as a prefix and wichan or weon later as suffix. So meaning to fully consecrate. That's what baptize means. You're fully consecrated or hallowed. And sorry, that should be an A. And it's an old compound actually, as wichan doesn't really survive elsewhere in Old English. And you can just see looking at it, it's old. It's like a early immersion or something. Really, this verb doesn't stick around. So we do get the noun that's related to weoch in some compounds. I think we went over it last time for the word for altar. But it does survive in things like Gothic wicha for priest, or German Weihnachten, which is the word for Christmas or literally Holy Night. So modern English actually does still have this word. It is the rare word full, and if you, I guess, are fulling, it means you're baptizing. So it sounds kind of odd. I've never actually read it in any text, but it is a thing. Maybe you read it in like an early modern text. So then we have Yebeda, Yishtrion, Neand, and Hamed. Oh my. Just kind of naughty words, really. So Yebeda is husband or wife. It is someone who lies in bed with someone else. It's a bedfellow, or you can kind of see it. Bed is right here. This is like a action together with it. So, and then we have Yematra, which is a spouse or a consort, a mate, an equal, or a match. It's literally really to match you. Then we have Yeshtriona. This should be Yeshtriona and Hamid, by the way. I'm always that's what this is for. I will refine this, and when I actually teach this an actual class, it'll hopefully have these spelling errors. But this just means procreation in of itself, though it can actually, in different contexts, have relations to gain and commerce and other varieties of words along those lines. Then we have Hamed itself, which is just sex, right? I mean, it's just intercourse. We have Haman, which is the verb. It means to marry or to have sex. Comes from this Proto-Germanic Haimiana, which means to take home. Okay, it doesn't have that sense in Old English, but you can tell it's related to home still. So we have blessings and blood, actually. So we have the word Bletzung, which means blessing, unsurprisingly, I'd say. I mean, we don't have this T in it anymore. But we also have the verb, bledsion. There's a few ways of spelling this depending on what time period, what dialect it is, but it means to bless. But you can kind of see, especially even here, though, with this D rather than this T, you could say bletsion probably later. That's probably more of what Ælfric would put. Anyways, it is related to blood. In fact, in the Proto-West Germanic, blodsion means to mark with blood. And so this is something that, again, pre-conversion, they had this word that meant to mark with blood, probably in a religious sense, if I were to guess, and that they adopted it after they adopted Christianity. They reuse this word, but it doesn't have anything to do with blood anymore. Maybe they thought it did, right? Like maybe they thought it was fitting that we were blessed, by like the blood of Christ or something like that, but it's not physically, being anointed with blood or anything like that. Though it seems like that's what originally it meant. Okay. Anyway, binan. Just a really quick note. This is not a verb. Kind of looks like one. It is actually a contraction of be and inan, so it is actually a preposition meaning within or in. And then some words to know, which we just kind of go over these real quick. Pretty much vocabulary. We have ea, which is fear. We have frover, which is comfort or consolation. We have bechatan, which is the promise, as opposed to the earlier yechatan. But I believe Ælfric is using bechatan here. And they have dai huam licha, which is just a funny way of saying daily, so don't let it confuse you. And then we do have some something that I thought sounded very modern, right? When you read it and you're like, huh, that's interesting, because it just sounds like if you were to read this just a translation, if you weren't going to read the Old English and translate it yourself, then you'd probably think, oh, they're just using a little bit of literary license here. But it's actually not a modern idiom. This is what Ælfric says. He says, "Our he dathis on byrda." So he is actually saying before he tastes of death. On byrkjan means to taste or to take food, more literally. So he's just saying it. It sounds very modern as far as an idiom is concerned, but it is Ælfric's words. So then we also have this idea of the Redeemer. So a word that shows up in this homily, it shows up in other things as well, is alisend, which is Redeemer, Rescuer, Releaser, Liberator, stuff along those lines. So redeem for me felt too much like Middle English almost, right? So redeem actually means to buy again. In Middle English, Christ is sometimes called the again buyer, right? That's why we adopted the Latin here. I think redeem kind of obscures the meaning of it, but I have not seen again buy in Old English. But again, he's performing the verb aliezan here, which means to detach, remove, or release from something, right? That doesn't really have any of this redeem connotations to me. He's not buying our souls again. In this case, he does, right? But like he's not. In this case, he's releasing us from something. I think releaser is probably a good translation here. And you do actually have an example from the Wycliffe Bible. You wot that min achin bira liveth. So I know that my again buyer liveth. So I know that my Redeemer lives in modern English. But again buyer literally though. Redeemer if you want the Latin name. And then we also have Halwinden or Halwinden. This is something I'm not quite sure of. Pretty much what we're going to look at is this a proper noun? Right? It's the same word, just lowercase h and uppercase h. So capitalizing proper nouns was not a practice at the time, right? We saw in the manuscript actually that Godus Husa, as opposed to Godus Husum, but Godus Husa was not capitalized. God was not capitalized, which is something we would capitalize now. So Thorpe actually translates this as the healing one, and Liuza as salvation, and that's quite different. Now, Liuza, if I'm remembering correctly, I think he tends to translate stuff like Helen, which means healer, as just savior, or maybe even Jesus Christ. That's a common translation for it, right? Because Jesus himself means savior, and Christ pretty much is along those same messianic like meaning, right? It's the same thing actually when you read the Helion, when Gabriel. We'll talk about this in the next lecture because it'll be on the Annunciation, that Gabriel says in his name, he doesn't say his name will be called Jesus, he says in his name will be called Heliond, which is the old Saxon version of Highland, which just means healer or savior. Savior I feel like makes more sense to a modern English reader, but healer makes perfect sense to me still. I translate Highland as healer almost always, just because I don't think people would not understand that, especially if you capitalize it, healer, right? So I actually put it as healing here because I'm not sure. I think either way, saying this is whether a proper noun or improper. So that's up to you, something to be thinking of. If I remember correctly, I pulled my text from Thorpe, and so I have it actually in the Old English capitalized as Howlinden. But if you look at my translation, I don't actually. I just put healing. So, and then we have peoples or Gentiles. So there's a couple moments here, if I remember correctly, actually, where he puts theod, which generally means peoples or nations, right? This is where Theoden is. He's the people ruler. Gentiles could actually be usage, I feel like. If you see like Gothic Thutha, which is translated as like heathens or Gentiles, right? So, but that's not necessarily fair. I mean, those traditions in their interaction with Christianity are pretty far apart and separated. I think Thorpe likes it translated as Gentiles, but I think translating as peoples works perfectly well too, and I think it gets the point across. There's a tendency to talk about the Gentiles in Israel, though, and so I think that contrast does work fine. And it just to note, though, the word is just literally peoples or nations. We have Ela or Achla is the standard here, which just means oh, hey, alas, something like that. We actually have an example also though from Christ 1. Just lines of 104 or 105. These are rather famous lines though, and it's Alla Arendel Engla Berchtast over Midanjar Monum Sended. So hail Arendelle, brightest of angels, across Middle Earth, sent to mankind, pretty much. which inspired Tolkien to write something else. So then we have also another word here, which is beklipte, which is just a variant of clip-on, pretty much, which means to clasp, embrace, to hold, or to clip. Again, you're hardly ever going to see clip here in a modern English sense, but actually at St. Mary's Church in Wixworth, Derbyshire, and maybe some other churches in England, if I were to guess. I'm not sure they're all on the same date, but on the 8th of September, which I found out in this book, reading this book, clipping the church is actually still practice. The building is encircled by people joining hands, and while this date is not really known to me why they do it, and besides the fact that it's dedicated to St. Mary, I mean, that is the Nativity of Mary, which I'm not sure is really widely celebrated so much these days, but in the Middle Ages it would have been. Also, not entirely sure when that that tradition started. Right, that has an Old English name, so it implies that maybe it, but I'm not sure when that word became archaic. Anyways, who knows how long that tradition has been going on. It could have just been like a Victorian reinvention for all we know. But it is something that is still in some ways connected to Old English. Then we have thoughts and thanks.
Hi.
I don't want to play that right now. I wanted to this right here. So we have ye thonk actually often, but or just thonk, which can just mean thought, opinion, or gratitude. This is where the word thanks comes from. Just an inflection of the word bought, pretty much. And so like it looks like think, doesn't it? Right. Um, so being grateful is kind of just saying I'm thinking about you, pretty much. And Jackson Crawford did a video on this actually recently in Thanksgiving, American Thanksgiving for 2024, which is right here, but we're not going to actually watch it, of course. So then we have Astichan, which kind of needs context, right? You can go back and look at it in the homily and see what context that gives. But Astichan can actually mean both downward and it can mean upward. It can also mean ascend and it can mean descend. So you definitely need the context there because that's not super helpful in of itself by itself. Then more words to wit here, words to know. So you have grund, which of course means ground. Can also mean bottom, foundation, abyss, or depths in the plural. I believe Thorpe, maybe Lusa, translates it as depths, and that didn't seem right to me because I'm trying to get as much of the sense of the Old English across to you as I can. We have on yet, which is understanding, intellect, knowledge, perception, sense, or meaning, which we'll kind of talk about, I think, on the next slide as well. And then klana, which means clean or pure or clear. Clearly is where clean comes from. It makes more sense to translate as pure sometimes, or even chaste. I have adi, which is happy, prosperous. This is the first things I think of when I see this word, though in this sense, it's generally modifying. It's adi Maria or something like that, right? So it's just Blessed Mary. Then I have has, which is a command or order, but it's where we get the word hest. We have unspedi, which is not wealthy or successful, it's just poor, right, or needy. We have the five senses, though, actually. We have yesis, which is sight. We have chlist, which is hearing or listening, more literally. We have swak, which is taste or smell. In this case, it's taste because we also have stench, which is smell. And we have Verbung, which is touch. I kind of want to talk about right and left here. This just came up to me, came into my mind when I was translating. This actually does not come up in the homily itself. I was just reminded of it. So right, the word right is in directional, right? Comes from Old English richt, which we see actually several times in this homily, but it actually very rarely indicates a direction in Old English. Very, very rarely. Swithra is the normal word for right. Okay, like my right hand, swithra. And then we have left. Actually comes from Old English left or lieft, which would mean weak or foolish. I think we see lieft in a compound, like one compound, and it's probably like a Kentish dialect word, and it seems to have come from a dialect usage for left hand, but it's not the common word for left. Again, this seems to be like a taboo idea, right? That this is my weak hand. It's like in like the idea of sinister, right? The sinister over here. But actually, it has a similarly tabooed name. Sounds a little better though. I think a little bit more positive in Old English, which is Wenestra, which literally means the friendlier hand. So Weena is friend, another word for friend. So it actually related to the word Venus here, but yeah. Anyways, so it's just interesting to think about. I think I do have a little ornithology lesson here. I think that some of these words don't exactly help with being cognates. I mean, sometimes they just confuse a little bit more, or sometimes it just needs a little bit of clarification. So we have turtlon, which is the turtle doves. You could just translate this as turtle. He wants two, like they want two turtles, right? You know what I mean? But then you would be thinking of a turtle, which not related to the word turtle, modern English word turtle. They'll both come from Latin, depending on what you're looking at. Ironically, though, actually, the word for turtle in Old English uh, sounds like bird. It's birdling, which means like little shield, boardling, really. So shieldling. So that's just an aside mostly. But we have Kuvran Brida. So we actually went over Kuvran in the Epiphany homily. And that just means pigeon. So culver in modern English. Bridas, though, is birds. So we have this metathesis that happens pretty often. You have the same thing with like horse. So it's horos in Old English. The R is actually right after the H and before the O, but it's horse in modern English. So the metathesis is really, really common. It's really particularly common with liquids, and R and L are liquids, which means they move around pretty easily. So like crocodile used to be cocodrilo, for example, right? That R moved and it's somewhere else in the word now. So same thing happened with birds. So actually, what's funny is I remember seeing like a meme, and I should have put it up here, of a pot that had like a picture of a bird painted on it, but it also had the word bird, but it just said brid, which is the Old English word for bird. Now, but it doesn't necessarily actually mean bird. It is where we get the word bird from, but it actually has an association of youth, right? Of chicks and fledglings. So these are young pigeons that need to be offered, not just, I guess, any old pigeon. So again, it's where we get the word bird, but it has this meaning of a young, of a youth. And it does actually is Ælfric is playing on it. There is a word play of Bridas with onbridness that Eleanor Parker actually points out. You can see in my translation as well. So words to ken, though, we have lassan, which is the plural of the comparative little. So it's literally lesser or smaller, if you would. Now we have fugalas, or it's often fujolas in earlier stuff, but here it is fuyelas. It's fowls, of course. We have wanspedi. Wan has the same meaning as un, so this survives in wanspeed as ill fortune. But if you remember a couple slides ago, we talked about unspedi, which just means poor, right? So it means the same thing. We're just using a different prefix now. I have tharva, which is a poor person. You can see the verb thurvan if you want to get more connections there. We have richa, which is powerful or rich. I mean, it can mean either one. And this one actually I found difficult to translate because I felt like either one worked pretty well, actually. We were talking about the poor. And so in context, right, as you can kind of tell, right here with Wansbetty and stuff, or Thartva. So I think translating as rich is a pretty good way to go. Especially remember, like earlier, you had the peoples and the Israel people, the folk of Israel. You could put Gentiles, and it kind of makes sense. So again, it's kind of up to you. I think the point would get across either way, but maybe there's a little bit of connotation from one that works over the other. It's kind of up to you. Also, foryav, which means it's where we get the word forgive, and it can mean forgive, but it does mean give here actually in the text. And it's intensified by 4. So we got more words though. We have unshathinissa, which is literally like unharmfulness, unscathiness, but it just means innocence. We also have arm, which means poor or miserable. It does survive in a modern English word arm, which of course is not common by any means. We have witta, which is punishment or torment. We have yurth, which means yearns. It's just that second person, or sorry, third person. So he yearns, he desires, he begs, whatever. Thorpe, Leoza, and Parker actually all put desires, which I think is a little weak, to be honest. I think yearns would make a bit more sense. Begs I think there should be a stronger sense here. But again, translate it as you will. Also, mode, a similar problem. Actually, I had it with everyone else too. This can mean mind, heart, or spirit. It's kind of difficult to translate. This is where we get the word mood, but I put it as heart. I think heart made it have a deeper sense rather than mind. So we also have lof, which is a praise or a song of praise or a hymn, if you would. It can actually appear as, and it does appear at the very end. We already saw as lof song, so just a praise song, even though song of praise song or something like that. It's actually where we get the modern word loaf, not to be confused with the another Old English word loaf, which we actually get the modern word loof, which is the palm of the hand. So. And then here we're almost done. So we have the sprint to the end. So we have more words. We have bilawita, which is gentle or innocent. We have broder radena, which is brotherhood. It's literally not brotherhood. It's brotherhood, kind of in modern English. So we have fraternity, brotherhood, same thing. It's honestly pointless for me to put fraternity there. Or fellowship, even, is a good word for it. I mean, right, like brotherhood. I don't know. It's just like I like when I say brotherhood. I'm not thinking of women. Like, so I think fellowship is in some sense works better, but it's not very literal because Ælfric uses brother or brother, right? So this last part is actually where we get the modern suffix of red, as in like hatred or kindred and stuff like that. So you can see that, I think. We also have cuckoo, which is funny when I read it that way, because I'm used to quick here, where we get the modern word quick, which just means alive, not like fast or speedy or anything like that. So, and then we also have wastma, which is fruit. It's the first thing I think of when I see the word, because I've actually in the Hexateuch section with Adam and Eve, which I've translated previously, it means fruit, right? Adam and Eve partake of the wastma, right, or whatever. And here, though, it is increase, and it can mean growth, increase, benefit, result, height, stature, whatnot. Also have with queden, which means against spoken or contradicted, rejected, refused. And we have first, which is time. A specific meaning of time, but doesn't survive into modern English like tide does, or time. It's the word time itself. So then we have thild, which just gives us modern thiled or thild. I'm not sure. Never seen anyone say it before. Probably thild, but it does mean patience or long suffering. We have sinshippa, which is a very interesting one, because I'll tell you right now, the translation really is just marriage. If you want to translate sinshippa, it's marriage. Sinship, normally these Y's are I's, actually. And it sounds funny, though. Sinship, like, you know what ship is, right? Everyone has, like, partnership or free ship, I guess would be freedom or whatever. But so it is being in part of what? Sin? What does sin mean? Well, sin actually means continual. It means ever, right? Like, it is in perpetuity, right? That is what this means. So forever, this bond of forevership, which I think is very interesting, especially since it really doesn't seem to go with "till death do you part." Forever to me implies forever. But either way, it's whether or not you believe in that, it's very sweet to think about that the word for marriage here is pretty much in perpetuity. I can't speak right now. It is continualness, right? It is something that goes on forever. So, anyways, evership is not a word, but I think if I break it down like that, it kind of makes sense here. We also have spellunga, which is just funny because this is where we get the modern word spell, like I'm going to cast a spell on you or whatever, and it just means speaking. That's all it means. And so, it's interesting, I think. But that's what it means. So don't worry or anything like that. Only one more slide. So we have actually the Old English Menologium. A Menologium is really just a calendar that's divided by months. You can see Menno here. So the Menologium, actually, that's what the thumbnail is. If you look at the thumbnail, that is the beginning of the Old English Menologium. Now we're looking at specifically just a few lines, 19b to 24a of this Old English Menologium, where it mentions Candlemas. So Candlemas in like the poetic corpus of Old English is pretty absent, right? Even in the prose, it's pretty absent. Like the two I mentioned at the start, from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and in the Laws, that's pretty late in Old English. So we do have this, though, where it is not called Candlemas, but it is mentioned. It's very strictly like Candlemas, like we know it's talking about Candlemas, right? And we can read it here. An thas emba Anna nicht, that way Marian massen haldath. Kningas moder for than heel Christ und tham dia. Barn while dendes bruchte to templa. Thana thas fif nicht, that affered bith winter of Wichem. So, and then after one night, we keep the feast of Mary, mother of the king, because Christ on that day, the ruler's child, she brought to the temple. Then after 5 nights departs winter out of the abode. So if you remember that if this is the 2nd of February, 5 nights later, winter's over, right? So it's getting kind of what Eleanor Parker was mentioned. I shared that quote at the beginning, where this is a connection, the end of winter in some sense, in the connection to spring, right? February 6th would be the last day of winter in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, and February 7th would be the very first day of spring. And as the world starts to wake up, it's still, I mean, like they still describe, if we were to look at, I'm forgetting what it's called right now, but will still describe spring as frosty, right? You know what I mean? But it's not like the dark and insane cold from Christmas pretty much until, I kid you not, here where I live. Okay, from Christmas until the February 1st, so the day before Candlemas, it did not get above freezing. And on February 1st, it got above freezing for the first time in over a month. Right. And so that I felt that was very appropriate, and it very much fits with that, not just this religious ideal, but this cultural idea that these Anglo-Saxons had, right? That when they were so much more in tune with the earth, as they relied more on it, in a sense, that people in the modern age, we've gotten less connected as time has gone on, pretty much. I mean, I don't feel that connection. I'm not a farmer or anything like that, right? And so that is very very nice, though, and I liked to see that connection in real life. And in years past, most of my year, even last year for the most part, I would not have cared or even thought about Candlemas at all, right? So I was very happy to be able to go through and do this translation. I apologize for any slight errors or spelling mistakes. Feel free to point them out. The problem is I go through this before I actually present this, but then I don't actually see it until I'm talking about it in front of the camera. For some reason, I'm like, oh yeah, I spelled that wrong. Sorry. I should say sing and not sign or whatever. So, but I do appreciate anyone who watches this. I hope it helps with something. This takes a good amount of time, and I am very busy, but I don't want that to come off as a complaint at all. I very much enjoy doing this. It is very fulfilling, and it is very much worth the time. And so if you have any questions, it will be a little while until the next video, as I'm doing the Annunciation, which is later in March. Hopefully I will get that one set up and ready to go, so I'll have time to do Easter, which will be less than a month after the Annunciation. And so hopefully I'll get the Annunciation set up and done, recorded and ready to go closer to the date, and then I can get Easter going as well. So that is on time. And again, if you ever have any questions, even after this is uploaded, if you have any questions on this, feel free to ask in the comments. I know a lot of people don't like public comments on YouTube. Feel free to email me, contact me elsewhere, wherever you can. But anyways, any help I can give. I don't want to act like I'm insanely qualified for this, but I am trying to become more qualified in some sense by doing this myself, without, in a class or something. But I hope you're here to learn along with me, and I enjoy it. So anyways, I'm Liam. I hope you're having a blessed time, and that doesn't involve any blood this time.